Hey y'all, Melissa here at Twin Oaks Family Farm on Twin Oaks Farm Poultry. Thanks for joining us. You'll want to update on our current flock of Cornish Rock cross meat chickens. They are about 3 days away from going to the processor. So they're about 38 days of age. And actually, since about day 35, they've been at the point we would consider finished. If their processing day had been on their day 35, we would have been happy with that. We'd have been ready to see them go to processing. Really great, successful meat production individuals in this flock, which Cornish Rock cross meat chickens are superior for meat production as far as feed to meat conversion, as far as efficiency, as far as time effectiveness. If you want to raise great poultry, the Cornish Rock cross meat chickens are a top option, and they do have a heavy appetite, but correspondingly they convert the feed to meat rapidly, and so they can start to finish for poultry production very quickly. Okay, so as I mentioned, really 35 days. We really believe that if you have conditions that are favorable and the birds consume a target feed consumption quantity and quality, that really at 35 days we can have them ready to actually be considered finished and go to processing for excellent homegrown top quality poultry. As it is, this flock has its processing date when they're 41 days of age. The thing with that is we don't have a whole lot of flexibility on the production length because we have to set it so far ahead. And when I say have to, that's in terms of we use a USDA inspected processor. USDA inspected processors are somewhat few and far between. We're in Ohio. As far as we know, we've been told there's 3 in the state of Ohio. Fortunately, the one that's closest to us is able to work with us. So we actually have our farm label set up with them, and we consistently take our poultry there for processing. And being that we've done that, they give us the opportunity at the end of the calendar year to set up our appointments for the following calendar year. So when we have this flock, I was trying to get the one going to the feeder there, but the lighting, it goes right from shadow to dark, so I don't know if you got much of that. But as it is, setting it up that way, so with this flock having its processing date October 14th, that was set up in December of 2023 for October of 2024. So when we get out here, 4, 5, 6 weeks with the flock actually in production, we don't necessarily at 35 days have the flexibility to say, hey, that flock is finished, let's move up their processing date a week. We have to try to be aware of our production system and the results that it brings about. We have to be aware of that to a point where we can try to plan a flock's production length way before that flock is ever even in existence. So that can be a challenge, and that's a challenge that's kind of felt broadly across all species of livestock, because even if you're raising pork or raising beef, frequently if you're taking those to a processor, which oftentimes you need to, I think those other species of livestock may only require a state level inspection stamp, whereas poultry, and there are exemptions to this, but if you're going to get inspected poultry in the USA, it requires a federal inspection rather than a state level inspection. You have to have a federal inspector versus a state inspector. So I think it applies pretty broadly across all species of livestock. Even if you're taking beef or taking pork to especially a state inspected processor, but even possibly a custom processor, they book up quickly too. So, we also hear of folks that we know, taking cattle and taking beef to a processor. They've got to book way in advance as well. My husband's family's farm, they also raise cattle and sometimes keep some little groups of pigs there for pork, but oftentimes, like they'll sell it on the hoof and it's the customer setting up the processing appointment. So, then that's kind of in their hands. But if you're a pork or beef producer that is actually doing that part of it, setting up that processing appointment, they run into the same things we do with poultry. So very frequently, like with poultry, you may be able to call up and get an appointment, in a relatively short amount of time. But we generally advise, if you're raising poultry and you think you want to hire a processor, be checking into that well in advance. Because if it's especially busy season of the year, like it's really favorable to raise these kind of meat chickens when weather conditions stay fairly warm. So anybody and everybody who wants to raise them is doing it then, and then everybody wants them processed about the same time, and they can only handle so many at your processor. So we did find it interesting. I believe the last time we took birds to the processor, which wasn't that long ago, I think we were told the processor that we used, they had 2,200 birds scheduled for that same morning that we had birds there. And of course, part of their system is automated, but they can butcher and process like 600 birds an hour, I think is what they told us. So we have processed poultry ourselves at the size of flock that we want to raise, like maybe like this, 300 or 400 at a time. We don't want to process that many birds at one time. So several years ago, we just opted, hey, we're gonna hire that out to a processor. Now this is interesting. I want to show you all this. So see the two birds side by side at the water, and the one is tiny and the one is giant. They're both exactly the same age. I don't know if we'll get a closer look at the bird there on the left as we're looking at it, the tiny one. But the size difference is accounted for because the bird on the left has a beak deformity. We call it scissor beak. There may be a better term for it. But what it is the top beak and the bottom beak don't line up. So, of course, that bird has been able to eat and drink enough to thrive, but it does impact the intake that bird can accomplish in food especially. And so that impacts that bird's growth. But it is interesting, that bird has started with this flock, grown with this flock, and is in this flock while they're at finish point. And he's a little rooster. The other birds don't bully him. They don't try to trample him. They don't give him a hard time. So he's done okay. As a meat bird, he's not successful. He's not going to processing with this flock. But as of right now, the day that they go to processing, I think we're just going to keep him here. We actually have these guys go October 14th, 2024, and we have a flock coming in of meat birds a couple weeks later, a smaller flock. 100 birds, 125 birds, I think, is coming in then. At the same time, we're ordering also some Rhode Island Reds that would eventually go into our egg production flocks. So we'll have about 60 of them coming in. So what we're thinking is when this group goes to processing, now I lost track of the little scissor beak bird, but anyway, when this group goes to processing, we'll probably keep that bird here, and then like this one, let me see if I can get the camera on, I think it's another little rooster actually. The one standing up right there that's kind of cleaning its feathers, we call that preening. That one's on the small side, and there's another one in this flock that's on the small side. So I probably won't send those two to the processor. So there's those three birds. So I'm thinking when the whole group goes to processing, we'll probably keep those three here. So that way, they'll have a buddy. I don't really want to keep a chicken by itself. Chickens kind of like to have a buddy. They're a little bit social that way. So we'll probably keep those three here. And then with the scissor beak bird in particular, when I think that's the other small one actually at this water. Not this one, but this next one. So, so with the scissor beak bird, what I think we're going to do is put it into the group of Rhode Island red pullets that are coming in here as hatchlings the end of October, and then hopefully that will be the group that that bird stays with, because I think if we tried to put the little scissor beak bird like into our group of current egg production hens, I don't think they would accept that, and I think they would pick on that little bird. But if that bird starts with a little group of hatchlings and they grow up with that bird, I think, you know, they'll just by default accept that bird into their group, and it'll be okay. And then the two small meat birds that don't go, one of two things will happen. Either they'll either continue to grow and end up thriving and be able to go to processing potentially, even though they'd be older, but be able to go to processing with a group of 100. Or if we end up finding out that the reason that they're small is maybe because like maybe their heart function isn't strong, and it's kind of an expression of like a failure to thrive at this point. If that's the case, then we might actually see them start to decline, and they might end up being cull birds anyway. But really, you know, most of the birds, we see this uniformity of size, and that's something we look for in meat birds. We want a uniformity of growth amongst the flock. And so when you have individuals that don't really attain that same general uniformity of growth, you know, there could be a reason for that, like, you know, maybe decreased organ function, particularly in the heart, that is not supporting the growth spurts, because they definitely, meat birds, you kind of see like at 3 different points in production, you kind of see their appetite definitely increase, but like I would say double, okay? And so as their appetite increases, you see the growth rate basically increase. So like here, this last almost week of production, we've seen them fill out a lot where they're distributing the meat into particularly the chicken breast and the chicken thigh, and even into the drumstick. Okay, so this flock is doing excellent. We're really, really pleased with how this flock is doing. I mentioned earlier, you know, like we still have this belief, we're raising them 6 weeks, but we still have this belief that if conditions are favorable and they hit their, nice looking rooster, and they hit their target feed consumption quantity and quality, we believe we can finish them in 5 weeks. But this group is like 5.5 weeks right now, and we'll go to the processor right at 6 weeks of age. But this is what we want to see. So we figure 10 pounds on average per bird on a 22% protein value complete feed formulated for meat birds, and we let them have free feed or full access to feed. So round the clock, start to finish, the entire time. We never take the feed away. They can get to it anytime they want it. Okay, so for a flock of approximately 400, we planned 4,000 pounds of feed, and actually they had already consumed that as of about day 36. Well, we had distributed it all by the end of day 36, and they're still working on eating that down, but most of the feeders are getting down to less than half. So this is like, there's not in what we anticipated them eating, it's all distributed. It's all on the floor for them. On the floor, I mean, in their feed trays. So they're going to work on finishing it between now and Sunday. So it will have taken them about the full 40 days before going to processing to consume the 4,000 pounds of feed. And I think we actually started out with about 434, I believe, and I think we are down to about 420. And what accounts for that is you do sometimes have flock mortality during production with meat birds, and it can be just a simple failure to thrive issue, or, you know, it can be organ failure, like you can see the heart give out, like it's a right ventricular heart failure that typically happens in meat birds when it's the heart. We haven't had mobility issues in this flock, but sometimes you can see mobility issues where they kind of just quit walking. And sometimes it happens before they're big. It happens when they're still small, but it's almost like form to function, like confirmation. It's almost like as they do start to take a growth spurt and their center of gravity changes a little and the point of balance changes a little, if they're like, it's not like being toed in or toed out or knees turned in or knees turned out, but if, you know, if the way their conformation is with their legs relative to their body, if that gets affected to where they just stop wanting to walk around, then you're going to end up with one that instead of them continuing to bear weight on their legs and continuing to gain strength from that gradual and steady weight bearing, if they stop using their legs, you get a real atrophy of muscle, and then as they do grow a little, they can't move because they can get to where it's difficult for them to bear their weight on their legs if they stopped moving around. And so once that happens, once they kind of just give up on moving around, they will lose mobility. And that's one of the reasons we think a really important flock management principle with your meat chickens is go into the pen every day, multiple times a day, and gently walk around amongst them and encourage them to get up on their legs, to stand up, to walk around, to move from place to place in their pen, and observe, are they staying mobile? Are they staying fit? Are they staying strong enough to move around? And keep continuing to encourage them to walk a little bit every day, because they will choose not to, given the option. And that's not because they're lazy, but, you know, it's because their drive, and this specialized bird has been brought about the same way designer dogs that don't shed have been brought about, by really selective breeding to specialize really specific traits. So this bird has been selectively bred to put the emphasis on heavy appetite, rapid growth, efficient feed to meat conversion. So that's what they want to do. That's what their drive is. So their drive isn't to be busy and active and curious and jump over the fence and try to fly. That's not their drive at all. Their drive is just eat. Their drive is eat. And the mechanism that drive supports is grow. And so even though you don't see activity, like they're not up being active necessarily in their pen, even though you don't see outward activity, the activity is internal. They are growing. The eating supports the growing, the resting supports the growing, and the activity level impacts the meat quality. In fact, you don't want really a meat production animal running around, jumping up and down, beating its wings against its chicken breast, etc., because that actually toughens the end result of the meat in the outcome. So there's a lot of little puzzle pieces that go into production agriculture, into raising meat production animals for wholesome and nutritious meat. But, you know, this opportunity to see like a meat production flock of chickens through these videos here really gives you an in the pen look at some of the considerations and planning and management that goes into that. And we were recently asked by one of our channel members, Fidel asked, thanks for the request on this, you know, if you're going to start an operation like ours, what's the one thing we think is important to have in place? And we'll try to expound on this in another video another time. But I think just doing some practice of raising some small flocks and really becoming really aware of our own resources for raising the birds and learning management techniques that help us use our own resources for the most effectiveness, but really practice raising some small flocks to get to know, how do I do this in order to have a consistent system that I can count on producing a quality product. And so, we know from practice with many flocks that the practices we're using after we take the bird to the processor and get the poultry back, we know that it's producing excellent poultry, and we get that feedback from our clients consistently, and we request that feedback. But that has to be the main thing, our main priority. Like for us, we want to be able to market the chicken and work with clients and have them enjoying the homegrown top quality chicken. You may just be wanting to raise it for your own household consumption, but regardless, the quality of what we produce has to be the top priority, in my opinion, in our opinion here. So with that in mind, we have to kind of work on what is our production system, how do we perfect it as much as possible, and how do we make it consistent so that we know that what we're doing is going to give us the best opportunity to produce wholesome meat from this production agriculture operation. And so with that being the starting point, emphasizing the quality of the meat that we produce, then we can work on the other parts of whatever our goal is. Like for us with marketing it, we also have to work on reaching potential clients. We have to work on, what price points is appropriate and reasonable to sell the product at. How do we work with, turning it from feathered chicken to freezer chicken. So these chickens are resting. I love watching them rest because, man, they invest 100% in resting. But for us, so that's kind of the answer, a short answer to Fidel S. and anybody else that's watching that might be curious about that. That's the short answer. The quality of what we're producing has to be, we think, top priority, and then everything else can go from there. So that's what works for us here, and different operations have different goals, and different settings have different requirements, but that's our main thing. If we're gonna start this, and that was how we felt in the beginning too. If we're gonna start this, first let's get really good at figuring out what works raising these birds and what gives us assurance that we can consistently produce a really top quality meat from raising them, and that's got to be the starting point, right? So at any rate, like I said, we will try to develop maybe a video that just is on that some more. This nice trio of birds here. Actually, there's the one standing up, just laying down, is a rooster. The one in the middle is a hen, and the one on the left is another rooster. But these birds are definitely finished, ready for poultry production. So I don't know a live weight. We just choose not to weigh our birds live. We instead just rely on, we know what our production system produces, and birds raised to this age on full feed that's quality, that do consume the quantity that we expect. After we take them to processor and get them back here, we know we can expect whole chickens 4.5 to 6 pounds range.